She walked out of the dressing room in a sapphire gown I paid for, turned one full circle, and said, "Jake thinks it brings out my eyes. Not you look nice, not what do you think, just that." That was the moment I knew she was going to bring him, no matter what I said. I had already asked her, calmly, plainly, not to. "Don't bring him to the gala," I'd said 2 nights ago over coffee, after spotting the seating chart she left on the kitchen island. She'd moved me to the end of the donor table and slid him into my seat, next to her. "I'm funding this entire evening," I said, not out of ego, but as a reminder. "You think that matters?" she asked, adjusting her earring. "You hate those events. You always sit in the back and leave before dessert." She wasn't wrong. I preferred it that way. Quiet money, anonymous plaques, strategic giving with zero press. Ellen, on the other hand, was the kind of woman who lit up when a waiter called her Mrs. Adair in front of guests. She fed on flashbulbs and curated intimacy with anyone she thought was going somewhere. And Jake was going places. Tech prodigy, startup prince, shirt always one button too low. The kind of man who thought eye contact was a form of currency. I'd met him twice. Both times, he shook my hand like he wanted to dominate it. Smiled like we shared a joke I didn't get. The first time was at a rooftop launch party. Ellen introduced him as a brilliant mind, totally changing the philanthropic game. I asked what his startup did. He answered, "We disrupt legacy donation chains to tokenize fractional equity via blockchain philanthropy nodes." I blinked once and changed the subject to the wine. Still, I didn't react. Not even when Ellen started mentioning his name in casual conversation. "Jake said we should go to Vienna in the spring. Jake thinks the foundation's brand is too safe. Jake thinks you should step forward a bit more. It's your money, after all." I said nothing, but I made one call. Not to her, not to him, to someone in Zurich who knew the real source of Jake's funding. You see, Jake's flashy seed round came through a shell entity labeled Corvus Bridge Capital. What he didn't know, what Ellen never even thought to ask, was that Corvus is owned, indirectly, by a trust. A quiet, heavily insulated trust managed by a family office that hasn't had a public name attached to it in 4 generations. That office. Mine. I didn't invest in Jake because I believed in him. I invested because someone I respect owed his grandfather a favor. And that's how legacies work. You prop up the fools of the next generation to repay the debts of the last. So when I told Ellen, "Don't bring him," what I was really saying was, "I know what you're doing. Don't force me to respond." She smirked. "You're being controlling," she said. "You don't own me." "No, I don't. But I do own the floor beneath your Golden Boys empire." And this is where I'll pause, just for a second, to ask those of you listening. If this kind of story keeps you locked in, take a moment to subscribe. Over 90% of people listen without subscribing, but it's what helps our team keep building these stories with the precision and grit you come for. Back to Ellen. She walked into the gala rehearsal the next day, laughing with Jake like she hadn't just crossed a boundary I'd drawn in concrete. I watched from the side of the hall. She didn't see me. That's the thing about spotlights. They blind you to shadows. Jake gave some awkward pitch to the PR manager about a spontaneous reveal during the event. "We'll call it her rebranding moment," he said. "A declaration. New energy. Future forward." The PR girl smiled tightly. "We don't usually improvise on donor-funded events," she said. But Jake was charming in that exhausting, frothy way startup guys always are. Later that night, Ellen came home humming. "Big day tomorrow," she said. "We're going to light it up." "We?" I asked. She looked at me like I was something behind glass. "Yes, we. You are still coming, right?" I nodded. "I'll be there." She didn't notice the edge in my voice. Or if she did, she misread it. Probably thought I was jealous. Or weak. What she didn't realize was that the one person in that entire ballroom with the power to end Jake wasn't her, or the chairman, or any of the headline sponsors. It was the man in the back row, holding a silent piece of paper. Something older than any photo op, stronger than any spotlight. A trust. With teeth. And it was already biting down. At precisely 10:45 a.m., Ellen walked out the door with her tablet under one arm and a coffee she didn't brew herself. She kissed me on the cheek, not affectionately, but like one might tap a snooze button on a sleeping alarm, and said, "Don't wait up. The seamstress wants to tweak the hem again." She was already halfway down the steps when I said, "You really are bringing him, aren't you?" No anger. No heat. Just data collection. She didn't turn around. Just tossed a smile over her shoulder. "Try to enjoy yourself tomorrow night. I mean it." And then she was gone, leaving behind her perfume and a question she thought I didn't already know the answer to. I watched her leave through the upstairs window. A car idled at the curb. Not a rideshare. His car. Jake's. She got in. That was her reply. You have to understand, Ellen wasn't reckless. She was surgical. Calculated. A political animal born a few decades too late to run for office and a few IQ points shy of running an empire. But what she could do was read a room and weaponize charm. That was her game. And the gala? That was her arena. Not the event itself, but what it represented. Access. Optics. Power by proximity. She thought this night would launch her, publicly, as a queenmaker. The woman behind the next tech darling. Not a wife. Not a donor's plus one. A visionary partner. And in her mind, I was just background noise. Footage to edit out. The man who wrote the checks but never stood in the photos. What she didn't know, what she never cared to know, was that my name doesn't have to be visible for it to matter. At the boutique, behind a velvet partition, Ellen stepped into her final fitting like it was a coronation. Her friend Liza sat nearby, sipping complimentary Prosecco, snapping photos like it was a bridal party. Well, Ellen twirled in front of the mirror. Too much. Liza grinned. It's like royalty and Silicon Valley had a baby. Perfect. Ellen laughed, then leaned in. I'm telling you, Lisa, tomorrow's going to change everything. I'm done hiding. This is my coming out party. Liza raised an eyebrow. Coming out, like, professionally? Ellen shrugged, eyes gleaming. Jake and I are building something real. He's getting attention from some European VCs now. They see what I see, his mind. This whole old money donor thing, it's fading. Jake is the future. Everyone else can either catch up or get left behind. She didn't know the irony of what she just said. Didn't know that those European VCs she bragged about were, in fact, rerouted interest generated by my family's holding arm. That I had asked for soft signals to be sent, indirectly, of course, just to see how much he'd inflate them in conversation. The answer? Too much. She didn't know that Jake's entire startup, his flagship platform, his burn rate, his runway, had been stabilized by what he thought was a friendly bridge fund. What he didn't know was that fund was Corvus Bridge Capital, a holding shell under Radnor Holding Group. And Radnor is wholly owned by an American family office that began during the Reconstruction era, bought land when everyone else panicked, and never once put its name on a building. That family office. Mine. And Jake? He wasn't just riding on borrowed time. He was driving a car registered in my name, metaphorically and legally. But Ellen didn't ask questions like that. She looked at things like they were decorative. She saw funding as magic. Money as vapor. Jake as spontaneous genius. And me? As a relic. I told the PR girl to prep a spontaneous moment on stage, she said, pulling her hair back to test her neckline. Nothing major. Just a little surprise toast. A new era. No big deal. Liza looked nervous. Will your husband be okay with that? Ellen snorted. He'll be where he always is. Back row. Staring at his wine glass. Besides, she paused, adjusting the earring Jake had given her. He had his time. This one's mine. That was her fatal misread. She thought I was irrelevant because I'd never fought for attention. She thought silence meant surrender. But silence isn't surrender. Silence is planning. And while she was twirling in front of mirrors and giggling with Liza about her grand entrance, I was already sitting with counsel, invoking a clause. A quiet clause, buried deep in the funding agreement Jake had signed. A clause that triggers immediate recall rights in the event of reputational risk, defined however the trust deems fit. He signed it without reading it. She paraded him without realizing it. And tomorrow night, that clause gets read out loud. The night of the gala arrived like a storm dressed in silk. Everything looked flawless on the surface. Pillared entrance wrapped in soft amber light. Champagne towers stacked like promises. Murmurs of legacy and innovation blending in the air like perfume and pretense. Ellen made her entrance 20 minutes before the official start time, wearing the same sapphire gown that Jake had declared visionary. She walked like the room owed her something, and in that moment, it did. Heads turned. Press cameras clicked. Donors nodded politely, some out of recognition, others out of habit. Jake trailed her like an accessory that didn't quite match the outfit. Too shiny, too loud, but expensive looking enough to get a pass. His tuxedo was designer, but ill-fitted, the kind stylists push on men who think elegance is the same as price. He looked like someone trying to wear power instead of having it. They mingled. Or rather, she held court while he orbited, throwing in buzzwords and startup jargon to anyone who glanced in his direction. He leaned too hard on his handshake, smiled too wide, and dropped names like they were borrowed. I watched it all from a seat near the back, exactly where Ellen had placed me, 2 rows behind the donor wall, near a pillar. I arrived just before the lights dimmed, deliberately late. She didn't notice me. She never looked past the first 3 rows anymore. The program began with the usual fare, welcome speeches, acknowledgments, a video montage of restored murals, and community music programs. Ironically, the very things my family had been quietly underwriting for years. Ellen was credited as Chief Development Liaison, a title she invented, but no one questioned. Why would they? She was charming, camera-friendly, and had mastered the art of sounding meaningful without saying anything concrete. Halfway through the night, she signaled the MC for the mic. Not scheduled, not approved, just spontaneous, as she had planned. "Good evening, everyone," she began, voice smooth, chin lifted. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the past but the future, a future driven by innovation, courage, and the beautiful intersection of philanthropy and progress." A few polite claps, the kind that said wrap it up, but she was just getting started. "There's someone here tonight who embodies all of that. Someone who's taught me to think bigger, bolder. Someone who makes me believe again in possibility." Then she turned and called him up. "Jake," she said, beckoning him like a prize on auction. "Come up here." He ascended the stage like he belonged there, held the mic like a CEO on IPO day. She wrapped her arm around his, kissed him lightly on the cheek, and said it. "This man is my future." Silence. Then awkward clapping. Then the hum of polite confusion. A few people smiled tightly. Others whispered. The board members didn't move. From my seat in the shadows, I could see the exact moment it happened. The moment the notification hit the chairman's phone. His screen lit up. He stared at it, brow folding in on itself. Automated trigger. Clause 14. Trust activation alert. He looked up, looked at Jake, then at me. Our eyes met. I gave the slightest nod. He stood slowly, like a man realizing he was holding a lit fuse. The mic passed back to the MC, who was visibly sweating now. Ellen smiled like a debutante in an oil painting. Perfect, frozen, unaware that the frame around her was starting to burn. Back at the chairman's table, the fund director leaned in and whispered something. The chairman pulled out a file from under the tablecloth. A printed packet, not digital. "We do things the old way." He flipped to the second page, fingers sliding down until it stopped. His lips moved as he read the clause under his breath. Then he stood up and made his way toward the stage, cutting across rows of chairs like someone walking upstream through denial. Jake was still talking, not just about money, but impact, disruption, realignment of values. The chairman tapped the mic. Jake paused. The room quieted. "Excuse me," the chairman said. His voice was calm, but his hand trembled slightly, just enough for those paying attention. "Apologies for the interruption, but this can't wait." He turned to the crowd. As of 8:46 p.m., the trust known as Corvus Bridge Capital has executed a full recall of funds related to a pending acquisition under Clause 14. Effective immediately, all outstanding capital transfers to Mr. Jacob Marlin's ventures have been terminated and reversed. Silence. Utter, biblical silence. Jake blinked, swallowed. Ellen turned slowly toward him, smile faltering like a power outage in her face. "What?" she said, barely audible. The chairman continued. "The clause was activated due to reputational risk associated with an unsanctioned public association involving a board member and an undeclared party. All disclosures have been submitted to legal." Jake stammered. I don't understand. "We're in the middle of." "You're in the middle of nothing," the chairman said, his voice now firmer. "The funding is gone. You no longer represent this foundation's values." I watched her eyes dart across the crowd, looking for someone to anchor to, someone who could stop the spiral. But this wasn't a storm. This was gravity, and it had already pulled the floor out from under her. Ellen's expression didn't register the words at first. She just stood there, frozen, radiant, dumbstruck in that sapphire gown, waiting for someone to laugh, or applaud, or correct the misunderstanding. But the room didn't move. The applause had stopped. The MC had stepped off stage like he didn't want to be anywhere near the blast radius. Jake looked like a balloon someone had let go of mid-sentence. "Wait, hold on," he said, stepping toward the mic. "There must be some mistake." The chairman didn't flinch. "There's no mistake," he said, voice hoarse now. "Clause 14 of the Corvus Agreement. Reputational clause. This event, this display, has breached the advisory's neutrality agreement. We had no choice." People started shifting in their seats. Murmurs began. You could feel the air contract. Cool, heavy. Ellen's eyes darted from face to face, scanning for a lifeline. There were none. Not tonight. Jake's hands went up like he was trying to physically stop something from collapsing. This is just optics. It's temporary. We can clarify in the morning. No. The chairman cut in, almost gently. The decision is already filed. Ellen finally found her voice. What? What do you mean reputational clause? What clause? Jake looked at her like she'd just grown a second head. You didn't know? I thought it was just bridge capital, she snapped, voice cracking. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. And that's when it hit her. Because this wasn't about love. This wasn't even about infidelity. This was about money, control, leverage, power dressed in patience. And she had humiliated the one man in that room who didn't need applause to pull strings. He simply tugged one thread, and the whole design unraveled. She stepped forward, voice desperate. You can't do this. You're blowing up an entire company over some personal grudge. The chairman looked straight at her. This isn't personal, he said. This is fiduciary responsibility. You dragged us into your performance, Ellen. You made us part of your drama. We're not in the business of scandals. We're in the business of preservation. A low cough echoed from someone in the back. Then whispers. One woman got up and left. A photographer slowly lowered his camera, unsure if this was still part of the event or if he'd just captured the beginning of a spectacular fall. Jake stood there blinking, mouth twitching. You could see it happening, the crash in his nervous system. From arrogance to panic to a single terrifying realization, the money wasn't his. And now it was gone. The lights above the stage hummed softly. The kind of silence that isn't really silent, just waiting for the next sound to fracture it. A woman from one of the donor tables leaned toward her husband and whispered something sharp. Another guest flipped through the program like he wanted to be anywhere else, anyone else. Jake reached into his jacket like he was going to pull out a phone, then stopped. Ellen's hand twitched at her side, the earring on her left ear shaking slightly. Her mask was slipping now, not the polished, curated one she'd been perfecting all year, but the real face underneath. The face of someone realizing she'd placed all her bets on a man whose entire future had been rented. The Foundation's counsel approached the stage and whispered something into the chairman's ear. The chairman nodded. To all in attendance, he announced, we apologize for the disruption. The program will continue as scheduled. The Foundation will be issuing a formal clarification shortly. And with that, he turned and left the stage, folder in hand, voice spent, looking every bit like a man who had just detonated a bomb to stop a worse one from going off. Jake stepped down, dazed. Ellen stayed rooted in place a few seconds longer before someone from PR gently touched her arm and said, we'll escort you to the green room. It wasn't a suggestion. I watched from my chair as the crowd splintered, small groups forming like rafts after a shipwreck. The music didn't resume. No one ate. No one danced. The gala, the crown jewel of the city's philanthropic calendar, had been cracked open, and the glitter inside? Hollow. She had tried to crown him her future, but what she really did was hand me the perfect stage for his past. The door slammed behind them with a sharpness that cut through even the thick velvet walls of the backstage corridor. Ellen dragged Jake by the wrist into the nearest side room, an unused reception suite lined with dusted-off chairs and spare floral arrangements, where the city's elite sometimes snuck in to escape press cameras. Tonight, it became a war room. Ellen spun to face him, eyes blazing, voice low but sharp. What the hell just happened out there? Jake didn't answer at first. He just stood there, jaw flexing, sweat blooming beneath the collar of his too-tight designer shirt. His mask, so smug on stage, was gone now, replaced with something raw, something scared. Jake, she pressed, stepping forward. What is he talking about? What trust? What clause? You said the capital was clean. Jake finally spoke, and his voice was nothing like the confident drawl he used in public. It was small, shaky, real. I didn't know, Ellen. I swear. I thought it was just a bridge fund. Temporary capital to buy time until the next VC round. I didn't know it was tied to a trust. You didn't know? She hissed. You let me walk out there and say that. That line, that you're my future? In front of everyone. He flinched. I thought the fund was anonymous. I thought it was institutional. I had no idea, none, that it was his. Silence. The realization didn't hit her all at once. It came in waves. First, the obvious. The man she had humiliated in front of donors, CEOs, and the press owned the capital that was propping up her golden boy's entire platform. Then deeper, he'd always known. He'd seen the seating chart, heard the name drops, and still, he hadn't stopped her. Because he hadn't needed to. He already had the blade resting on the wire. And she'd walked Jake onto the stage herself and handed him the scissors. Ellen's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Jake slumped into a chair, and pulled at the knot of his tie. Series B was falling apart. No one wanted in without someone credible on the books. I was desperate. Then Corvus Bridge Capital stepped in. Gave me 12 months of runway. Fast. No questions asked. I thought I was lucky. Ellen slowly sank onto the edge of the table. Her voice was colder now, quieter. He's not lucky, Jake. He's deliberate. Jake looked up. You're saying he planned this? No, she whispered. I'm saying he watched it happen. She thought back. Every missed call, every passive comment he'd ignored, every moment he'd smiled that unreadable smile and let her keep going. Not once had he raised his voice. Not once had he begged her to stop. Because he didn't need to beg. He'd already owned the one thing Jake never understood, leverage. And she had practically paraded it on stage with the spotlight. Jake rubbed his temples. They're going to recall everything. The initial capital. The options. They'll force a down round, and then claim the majority under default terms. Can they do that? He didn't answer. Which was answer enough. Ellen exhaled through her nose. Her fingers trembled slightly as they curled against the edge of the table. This isn't just a scandal, Jake. It's professional suicide. I brought you here to elevate both of us. I thought I was handing you influence, his influence, and now he's erased me, Jake said. And maybe you too. Ellen's head jerked toward him. Do you think anyone's going to want you on their board after this? Jake added, bitterness creeping into his voice. You just tanked your husband's trust by dragging me on stage like a goddamn trophy. Ex-husband, she snapped. Jake tilted his head. Is he? They stared at each other. That perfect gala lighting didn't follow them into this room. Here, everything was unfiltered. Jake looked like a man who had finally understood the depth of the pool he'd dived into. Ellen looked like someone standing in the ashes of a home she'd burned herself, wondering why it still smelled like smoke. There was a knock on the door. 2 light taps. Then silence. Neither of them moved. Ellen finally stood, smoothing down her gown with mechanical precision. You need to disappear. Tonight. Before the press comes. Disappear? Jake laughed, a dry bark of a sound. Where do you want me to go, Ellen? Back to my unpaid interns. You think I can just vanish when everything's in my name? Except the money? She didn't answer. Her mind was already moving. But not toward damage control. Toward him. Because she realized something else just then, something far more terrifying than what had just happened on stage. This wasn't just a punishment. It was a response. Not to her affair. Not even to the public embarrassment. It was a response to underestimation. She had underestimated a man who never once raised his voice, but had the power to remove hers. And now, the room wasn't just cold. It was empty. The email came at 6:13 a.m. Subject, urgent, board motion passed, immediate action required. Ellen opened it groggily, still in last night's gown, now rumpled on the floor like a discarded costume from a failed play. Her head pounded. Not from alcohol. She hadn't had a single drink at the gala, but from the sheer velocity of what had unfolded in less than 12 hours. She hadn't slept. Not really. Just drifted in and out of a cold, anxious half-sleep on the couch, while her phone buzzed like a dying insect on the coffee table. At first, she thought the email was a mistake. Some automated update about seating plans or donor thank yous. Then she saw the phrase, motion passed. Effective immediately. She sat up. The message was terse. Not cruel, not dramatic, just official. The way a bank sends you a foreclosure notice. The way a stranger ends a contract you didn't know was about to expire. Ellen, following last night's incident at the gala, an emergency session was convened this morning by a quorum of the Foundation's executive board. After reviewing the footage and associated reports, a unanimous vote was taken to remove you from all advisory and liaison roles within the organization. Please be advised that your access to the Foundation's internal communications, servers, and donor management systems has been revoked. A press release outlining the board's decision has already been drafted and scheduled for distribution at 8 a.m. You are no longer authorized to represent or affiliate with the Foundation in any public or private capacity. Respectfully, Christina Merrill, Board Secretary. She stared at the screen. Reread it. Once. Twice. Then she tried logging into her Foundation email. Password rejected. She tried again. And again. On the 4th attempt, a red banner appeared. Your account has been disabled. Please contact your administrator. She didn't bother. Instead, she opened a group chat she'd had for months with the other board-adjacent faces of the Foundation. It had once been a flurry of brunch invites, gala prep, and smug inside jokes about who was in and who was deadwood. This morning, silence. She typed, anyone want to tell me what the hell is going on? No one replied. She saw 3 people read the message. Then nothing. It was the digital equivalent of being ghosted in a room full of people who used to smile through their teeth. She tossed the phone onto the couch and stood, pacing barefoot across the cold hardwood floor. This wasn't about Jake anymore. Jake was a spark, but she had become the flame, the face of a disaster. And now, her proximity was no longer valuable. It was toxic. She turned on the TV, flipped to a local morning segment. The headline on the crawl: Philanthropy Gala ends in scandal. Tech founders' ties to embattled trust spark fallout. Her own photo appeared beneath it, cropped from last night, eyes wide, lips parted mid-toast, Jake's hand wrapped around her waist. The caption read, Ellen Adair, former development liaison, Arts and Legacy Foundation. Former. They didn't even wait a day. She sat down slowly. Her stomach twisted, not from betrayal, not from rage, but from rejection, from irrelevance. For years, she had built an identity on borrowed legitimacy. She didn't need to own the money. She just needed to be close enough to it to draw heat. Proximity had been her currency, influenced by association. And last night, she spent all of it. The worst part wasn't the emails, or the lockout, or the drafted press release. It was the realization that no one was calling her to fix it. No board member asking for her version. No PR assistant offering spin options. No donor wife texting to gossip about damage control. Just silence. Because now, she wasn't useful. She was liability-shaped. And nothing in the philanthropic world dies faster than a public liability. At 7:21 a.m., a private number called her cell. She answered on the first ring. Ellen Adair, a clipped voice asked. Yes. This is Marlene from Pierce and Grayson Media. We're covering the gala story. Would you like to make a comment before we go live? Ellen blinked. Live. You'll be named in roughly. She paused, typing, 39 minutes. Ellen said nothing. We'll assume no comment then. Thank you for your time. Click. She sat still, as if moving would make it worse. She realized, in that moment, that she was no longer just removed. She was erased. Not by force, not with shouting, but with the quiet flick of institutional memory, the kind that closes ranks and edits the narrative like you were never there. Her legacy, such as it was, had been paper-thin, and now the paper had been shredded. The letter arrived not as an email, not as a ping on Slack, but as a hand-delivered envelope. Jake was still asleep on the couch in his overpriced apartment downtown, TV flickering through the credits of some late-night interview show no one watched anymore. He hadn't gone home after the gala, partly because he didn't know where home was supposed to be now. Ellen hadn't answered his last 5 texts. He'd sent the last one at 3:19 a.m. We need to talk. This is bigger than us. No reply. He looked like a man who had been forced to watch his own obituary scroll across a screen in real time, only to realize the date was correct. The knock on the door came at 8:42 a.m. He opened it, shirtless, still reeking of panic and champagne. The man standing there was in a gray suit, no tie, holding a black leather document folder. Mr. Marlin? The man asked. Jake nodded, rubbing his eyes. You've been served. That was it. No flourish. No warning. Just a firm handoff and a retreating pair of dress shoes echoing down the hallway. Jake stared at the envelope. It bore the crest of Ashton, Merrow and Reed's LLP, the legal firm that handled the discreet affairs of people who didn't take meetings. They summoned them. He ripped it open and unfolded the packet inside. Subject: Notice of Investment Recall and Execution of Clause 14C. He read the first line 5 times before moving on. Per contractual agreement executed on June 3rd, the undersigned trust, hereafter referred to as Initial Capital Provider, formally notifies Mr. Jacob Marlin of the cessation of remaining disbursements under Bridge Series B funding. His stomach dropped. Due to reputational breach triggered by unapproved public exposure and direct association with a named scandal, the trust exercises its right to immediate equity reclamation under Clause 14C. Clause 14C. The same clause the chairman had muttered on stage. Jake flipped through the remaining pages. Legal terminology swam in front of his eyes. Liquidation rights, breach of fiduciary assurance, retroactive withdrawal. Then he saw it. Trustee reserves right to seize up to 68% of current equity position in the event of reputational risk, with valuation adjusted retroactively to pre-Series B terms. He whispered the number aloud like a prayer gone wrong. 68%. They weren't just pulling out. They were taking everything. He tried to call Ellen's husband. Straight to voicemail. He tried again. And again. Still nothing. No voicemail message. Just silence. Like the number had never existed. Jake tossed the phone onto the couch and paced the room. No, no, no. We had 6 months of runway left. The team's mid-prototype. We just signed an MOU with 2 medical boards. This can't happen now. He picked up his laptop, started typing a frantic email to the Korvuzadmin at bridgecap.email address listed in the contract. It bounced back in less than 5 seconds. Address inactive. He opened Slack and pinged the company's lead engineer. Jake, urgent. Need to delay all non-essential dev freeze budgets. We'll explain soon. No reply. Then another ping came in. A new email from his CFO, timestamped 8:59 a.m. Jake, we just received word from Ashton Merrow. All operating accounts have been flagged. They froze the Series B reserve account. Payroll's in jeopardy. Please tell me this is a misunderstanding. Jen. He collapsed into the chair, eyes hollow. No one was returning calls. No one was clarifying anything. Ellen had gone dark. And the man he'd always dismissed as some reclusive donor with a checkbook? That man had never raised his voice, never made a scene, never even asked for a sit-down. But he'd erased Jake's company in one business day. Jake opened the deck he had been preparing for the next investor pitch. Page after page of lofty metrics, artificial growth curves, user projections, vapor-thin valuation estimates. And now, he saw it for what it really was. A castle built on borrowed bricks. He wasn't the builder. He was the face. And the man he had underestimated had simply turned off the lights. Jake leaned back, the echo of the gala still pounding behind his eyes. He thought back to that smug moment on stage, the kiss on the cheek, the bright lights, the polite applause. Ellen had called him her future, but now, he wasn't even his own present. He reached for his phone again, hesitating this time. There was no one left to call, only silence, and a letter in his hand that spelled the end in black and white. The first photo hit the news cycle just after noon. It wasn't the stage shot Ellen had planned with the PR team, her in mid-toast, Jake smiling behind her, the room bathed in golden light. No, this one was taken by a guest, slightly grainy, from the angle of someone 2 tables deep. Jake's face pale, lips parted mid-sentence. Ellen's smile frozen into something confused, like a partygoer realizing the music had stopped, but no one told her why. Next to it, the headline. Power couple's night turns to ice. Surprise gala appearance ends in public fallout. The article was clinical at first, event coverage with vague language. Unexpected interruption, tense atmosphere, investment recalibration. Then, the Real story kicked in. A sidebar followed the funding trail. That's when the fire started. One reporter, who had clearly done their homework, laid it out. Jake's startup, Clarity Health Tech, received Series B support from a shell entity known as Corvus Bridge Capital. And Corvus, according to obscure filings and 2 heavily redacted SEC disclosures, was linked to a historically private trust with deep roots in old money asset rotation, real estate holdings, and multi-generational endowments. They didn't name me directly. They didn't have to. The subtext was clear. Someone powerful had pulled the plug. Not in anger, not in haste, but with precision. And Ellen had handed him the switch. By 2 p.m., 3 other outlets had picked it up. One ran a feature titled, Legacy versus Disruption. What happens when you toast the wrong future? The comments section read like an execution. She chose Flash over Foundation. Guess who's not on the board anymore? Old money plays chess. These 2 brought finger paint. Clarity Health Tech? More like Charity Health Rec. By 3:30 p.m., a podcast had dropped an emergency episode dissecting the fall. 2 hosts laughed nervously as they speculated on the identity of the trust's backer. One guessed a Rothschild cousin. Another floated an ex-CIA spook turned philanthropist. None of them guessed the quiet man who had sat near the back, sipping his wine, watching the threads unravel with no expression at all. Meanwhile, Ellen's phone buzzed until the battery died. When she charged it back to life, her inbox was a massacre. Subject, speaking engagement, postponed. Subject, gala debrief, your status with committee. Subject, strategic partner realignment. Subject, apologies, cannot proceed. Dozens of emails. All formal, all polite, but each one a dismissal in disguise. Her consulting role with the urban renewal nonprofit? Suspended until clarity is restored. The interior design firm she'd partnered with for an upcoming art exhibit? No longer moving forward. The wellness podcast that once begged her for interviews? Shifting our guest lineup due to recent media noise. Even Liza, her closest friend, her echo chamber, had gone silent. The last text was from the night of the gala. You still at the hotel? We need to talk. Bad. No follow-up. No reply to Ellen's call me. Just digital dust. She opened Instagram on reflex, then quickly closed it again. The photos were still there. Her and Jake at rooftop fundraisers, spa selfies, behind-the-scenes shots from foundation events. Each one now a tombstone. The likes were down. The comments were brutal. She tried to post a story. A vague, soft-lit coffee cup with the caption, "Still here. Still grounded." Within minutes, someone screenshotted it and reposted with, "Still delusional." By dinner time, Jake's startup had issued a stiff public statement. Not an apology, not a defense, just a distancing. Due to unforeseen funding changes and complications unrelated to product performance, Clarity Health Tech will be pausing all non-essential operations and evaluating our next phase of growth. Translation: we're on life support, and the plug is halfway out. They didn't mention Ellen. Not once. She was already being erased, sanitized out of the wreckage like a rogue PR mistake. She tried calling Jake. It rang once, then went to voicemail. She tried texting. "We need to stand united. Just for optics. They'll crucify us separately." No answer. Instead, her phone buzzed again, this time from a number she didn't recognize. A text. Short. Cruel in its simplicity. You should have known better than to toast with someone else's money. No signature. She knew exactly who sent it. And that's when it finally sank in. Not just the embarrassment, not the headlines, not even the career freefall. It was the deeper cut. She wasn't being punished. She was being forgotten. She didn't make an appointment. She just showed up. The receptionist looked like she'd seen a ghost. Ellen hadn't been here in nearly a year. Not since she'd started calling the family office archaic and an anchor chain in those private conversations with her new circle. But now, here she was, standing in the marble foyer in oversized sunglasses, yesterday's silk blouse wrinkled at the sleeves, makeup half faded from either crying or not caring. Probably both. "I need to speak to him," she said flatly. The receptionist stood slowly. "Ma'am, Mr. Adair is in meetings all day." Ellen pulled off the glasses and slammed her hand on the counter. "I'm not here for a calendar slot. I need to see my husband." A moment later, the receptionist buzzed the inner office. Soft murmuring. Then silence. Then, "He'll see you." The walk down the corridor felt like a funeral procession. Polished floors. Framed legacy photos on the wall. Black and white images of men who didn't smile, but somehow still held power like oxygen. Ellen kept her chin up, but every step felt heavier than the last. When she entered the office, he didn't rise to greet her. He just looked up from his desk, calm, pen in hand, posture relaxed. Like she was early for a meeting she didn't know had been scheduled a year ago. "So," she said, swallowing. "That was quite a show." He closed the folder in front of him and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Not a show," he said. "Just a conclusion." She sat, but didn't lean back. "I don't know how you did it," she whispered. "But I know you planned it. The gala. The trust. The clause." He said nothing. "You knew Jake would be there. You let me humiliate myself. You let me." Now he smiled, but not cruelly. Almost sympathetically. "You were so busy making speeches, Ellen. You never stopped to check whose microphone you were holding." She flinched. "I made one call," he continued, sliding a thick manila folder across the desk. "Everything else, you did." She opened it with shaking fingers. Inside were documents, clear, dated, notarized. Her own signature repeated again and again. Waivers, disclaimers, transfer forms. All of them legal, all of them binding. One page, in bold print, sat on top of the second stack. "Trust recalls, final clause invoked." She read the clause out loud, her voice brittle. "In the event of reputational harm tied to a direct associate or publicly linked party, the trust may execute a full equity recall and freeze of disbursed capital, subject to the discretion of the Oversight Committee, which may operate anonymously." She looked up. "Anonymous?" He nodded. "We don't do signatures. We do outcomes." Her hands gripped the folder so tightly the corners bent. "This is insane," she snapped. "You buried this. You baited me into that stage. Into that speech." "No," he said calmly. "I warned you." She stared, breath shaky. "You could have stopped me." He tilted his head. "Why would I? You were already sprinting toward the edge. I just didn't stand in your way." She pushed the folder back across the desk like it burned. "This isn't justice. It's personal." He leaned forward slightly, folding his hands. "You made it personal the day you introduced him as your future. At an event I paid for. In front of people who know me. Who trust me." Ellen opened her mouth, but he raised a hand. "You didn't just insult me, Ellen. You tried to replace me. You took everything I gave you. Every platform. Every dollar. every door I opened. And you used it as kindling for a man who couldn't read a term sheet without sweating. She was trembling now. I didn't know. You didn't ask. Silence settled again, thick and final. She stood, gripping the edge of the chair for balance. You destroyed us. No, he said, standing slowly. You made a bet. He walked around the desk, stopping just beside her. And I let the house collect. She stared up at him, eyes red, lips trembling, voice now barely above a whisper. Was any of it real? He paused. For me? Yes. Until you decided to sell it for headlines. She looked away. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and opened a new folder like she wasn't even there. As she reached for the door, he said one last thing, quietly, almost kindly. Ellen, some people earn power. Some people marry it. You tried to borrow it. She didn't turn around, because she knew she couldn't argue anymore. And even if she could, the game had ended long before she stepped on that stage. The chandeliers glowed just as bright. The champagne poured just as freely. The string quartet played the same arrangement they always did, Mozart's divertimento, warm and sweeping. But the room felt different. Not louder, not grander, just steady, secure, like something had been repaired and polished, but not announced. The gala had returned. Same venue, same donor wall, same velvet-covered programs on every seat. But this time, there was no awkward silence. No scrambling press. No secret clause being whispered into a trembling chairman's ear. This time, everything was precisely as it should be. He arrived 5 minutes before the first speaker, walking calmly through the arched entryway. People turned when they saw him, not in surprise, in recognition. Some offered nods. Others rose slightly out of respect, the kind you reserve for a man who had once walked away quietly, only to return and reframe the entire landscape without ever saying, "I told you so." His name was printed clearly on the night's agenda. Opening address, Mr. Adrian Adair, executive patron. Not anonymous donor. Not liaison spouse. Just a name, a title, and a room that now remembered. He took the stage without flair. No spotlight adjustment. No pause for dramatic effect. Just a simple walk to the microphone, a quiet thank you to the MC, and then stillness. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice smooth but firm. A year ago, this event suffered a fracture. Not because of malice, not because of failure, but because of something quieter, misplaced trust. He paused. You see, legacy isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with hashtags or champagne toasts. It doesn't need a stage. It builds itself quietly, behind doors you don't photograph. The room was still. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. He continued. We are stewards. Of art. Of community. Of meaning. And when stewardship is mistaken for showmanship, the result is not progress. It is collapse. No names. No finger-pointing. Just truth. Unvarnished. And earned. He closed the folder in front of him and looked toward the front row, where the chairman sat once again. Calm this time. No emergency. No disruption. Just presence. Adair nodded once. Thank you, he said, for reading the clause. The chairman nodded back, lips pressed into a line that wasn't quite a smile, but close. The room erupted into applause. Not wild, not thunderous, but clean, real. The kind you hear when people aren't clapping for performance, but for stability. As he stepped off stage, the string quartet resumed. The night carried on. And yet, one chair, 3 rows from the front, sat conspicuously empty. It wasn't reserved. It wasn't blocked. It was just untouched. Like everyone knew, on some unspoken level, that it wouldn't be filled. Ellen wasn't here. Her name had been quietly removed from all foundation materials months ago. Her portraits taken down. Her contributions reclassified as legacy acknowledgments, which in this world is code for we've moved on, but not enough to pretend you never existed. Jake's company had dissolved within 7 months of the gala. Staff layoffs, lawsuits, unpaid vendors. His LinkedIn went dark. Last anyone heard, he was consulting in Europe. Or maybe Dubai. Or maybe nowhere. Ellen had tried to surface, an op-ed here, a podcast there. But the optics never quite healed. She had become the cautionary tale no one said out loud, but everyone remembered when new faces asked for too much, too soon. By midnight, the room had settled into the soft lull of a successful evening. Donors buzzed over canapes. The art installations glowed. The press took pictures, but not of him. He didn't need them to. He stood near the far wall, glass in hand, watching as new voices filled the space he had once held silently. One board member approached him. Adrian, she said, I hope you know how much calmer everything feels this year. He smiled. That was the goal. She nodded and walked off. He turned back to the crowd, and for the first time in years, the room didn't feel like a battlefield or a stage. It just felt clean, clear, settled, and one chair remained empty. Not as a monument, not as a threat, just as a reminder. Some victories don't roar. They remove.